Goodness. I just rewatched the movie again yesterday. Um, it had been a while since I had seen it. And then I was just like listening to the score just like all last night, and it was just I don't know, there's a quality to it that I feel like doesn't exist with a lot of film scores in terms of okay, it's gonna sound really cheesy, but I don't know, it's I don't know, the score to this movie kind of feels like almost like the skin of these characters. Like it feels really I don't think I've heard a score because we're so used to being like this is music. Um it just felt like it was so tied to the emotionality of the characters that I don't think I've heard that in a very long time, if ever. Um so I guess that's a very long-winded, very verbose, dorky way of saying that I love I love the work and uh thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you.
Um,
Nice. Thanks, Joe.
yeah, yeah. I guess I wanted to let's jump off with that, I guess. I mean, this is a very special movie, very specific point of view. I guess I kind of want to know maybe what conversations you might have had with Greg. I know you've collaborated with him before. But this is such a special movie and watching it again yesterday, it was just I don't know, I felt protective of it as a viewer almost in a weird way. I guess yeah, just initial concepts. What was sort of the conversation there?
The Greg Quidar and Clint Bentley, who's his writing partner, and they
Hmm.
they kind of co-direct. I mean, they alternate. So that this was actually the third project
Hmm.
I had worked on. So that they're friends, I guess, and there's actually a fourth film called Train Dreams that's going to Sundance, I think, next week or something that I
Okay.
also
Just never
scored.
stops. Yeah.
Um, and but Sing Sing is really special, obviously, and it was something that I had known about for years because they've been talking about it before they
Hmm.
figured out how to do it. Um, and they sent me the first 20 minutes. Greg sent me the first 20-minute like assembly, they
Yeah.
call it, before they'd even edited it. And I was just I think just to gauge my interest and sort of see if I had any thoughts. And I was really blown away. It
Hmm.
already had just the quality you just described, really.
Hmm.
And I immediately felt things. I felt like I was watching an opera,
Yeah.
without the music.
Hmm.
It has this kind of universal, timeless, human, just, there's the tragedy of it, but also the kind of universality of it. The fact that these characters are playing themselves for the most
Hmm.
part. There's really only two or three characters who are not playing themselves, and I think
Yeah.
that so there's a but it doesn't feel like a documentary necessarily. It has this just I feel like filmmakers as storytellers are always striving for this kind of authenticity that you just could never create. You can't make that up, really. And
Yeah.
so what was the music going to be? There's a feeling of like I said, I felt immediately kind of orchestra, orchestral colors, like soloists. There's a sense of
Yeah.
ensemble amongst the players. Even the way they dress, obviously, because they have to in Prison Greens, and there's like this they're a group and they're really kind of sharing this space and caring for each other and trying to find themselves within this
Yeah.
work theater. There's soloists that come out that kind of so that it's a very kind of basic idea of like ensemble with soloists, and that's what the music became. um the other thing I can say is that I very specifically decided that the music could kind of live beyond the walls.
Mm.
The sense of them being shut in and the kind of that oppressiveness of this
Yeah.
space they have to live in, but they're always looking out, whether it be looking out of the actual windows into the kind of wilderness beyond or looking within and kind of, trying to find their inner sense of peace or their inner sense of freedom through art, really, or through expression. And so that's where the music lives, is like in this
Hmm.
kind of horizon line. There's a couple
Oh,
moments where it ventures into the within the walls. You know, there's like the tragic moment where Mike dies, and
yeah.
it becomes much more fraught and kind of dissonant, and you kind of feel it claustrophobic, like inside the cell. But
Hmm.
otherwise, there's a sense of kind of dreaming beyond, and I think that the film walks a line with that. You know, not just the music, obviously. It's like there's really a sense of that elsewhere as well in the storytelling. We you
Hmm.
never mention and really venture into their paths or the
I
kind of
like that. Yeah.
tropes of violence or like what they're in there for, all of that. It's like, of course, there's all kinds of subject matter that's right there, but it
Hmm.
has a kind of set, you're really basically in these relationships between them. And so the music had to play a fine role with that.
Mm. Yeah, when I was listening to the music separately, the one of the words that I wrote, 'cause I'm a big dork and I like to like make notes about specific musical cues, which I wanted to ask about, but there was like a constant the word I kept constantly writing down was like reaching, whether that is like quite literally reaching, or it's this sort of like imaginative longing that these men may feel, even if they are in their cells by themselves, like just thinking about like what could be almost like there's something very sort of uh beautifully simply poetic about that I really love. Um, I did want to ask about one of the because I was listening to it so separately. I love the track that's titled Auditions. I like how it feels like maybe I guess like the ensembleness that you're talking about. Like it felt like waking up to me. It felt like I was really listening to other instruments sort of like just sort of joining in very gently, and I really love how I love the piano on that track, and I guess because that is a big sort of jumping off point for the film, seeing these men do an actual audition of what was important to you there, because that's one of my favorite cues that I keep coming back to personally.
Yeah, auditions might be the most orchestral.
Yeah.
It was a difficult that was a cue was difficult. It's like the music really has to hold. I think it's 5 minutes or
Hmm.
um yeah, about 5 minutes and which is long for a film cue. I
Hmm.
have written
Yeah.
long, but typically film cues can be, a minute or two. Three is
Hmm.
getting long, four is substantial, five is like, okay, this is a big piece of music.
Yeah.
So it needed to have it has a really that has the biggest orchestral palette. So there's like strings, there's two pianos, there's a kind of choir of brass instruments, mostly French horns, and then there's a choir of wind, mostly clarinets, bass clarinet. Um, and that again goes back to that thing I was saying about kind of different. Imagine like if you're looking out at the
Yeah.
sunset, like across a mountain or something, or across like just sort of different reliefs of like, almost painterly in a way of like dimension of just seeing beyond. I wanted music that felt kind of freeing or yeah, kind of reaching for something, but also somewhat improvised. So there's a feeling of a
Hmm.
kind of lightness in it. Um, I might have been listening to a fair amount of Debussy at that time. It has a kind of
Okay.
like, if you listen to like La Mer or Les Nuages or like these orchestral pieces that have a kind of translucent kind of lightness in the
Yeah.
orchestration. So that has a bit of that going on with, especially in the string playing, the kind of, um, harmonics or subtle pulsing. It's rhythmically, there is a pulse in there as well, an electronic kind of beat.
Yeah.
That's like a beat or a pulse or a tone that just kind of gives it like a punctuation point as you go through, something to hang around essentially, because there is a sense of rhythm
Hmm.
in the scene. But yeah, it's also one of my favorite cues. It was one of the hardest to write. It sort of became the linchpin in the whole thing. I think that particular one. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the you mentioned the length of it, but like I do listen to a fair amount of film scores, and when I saw I just saw the tracks laid out in front, I was like, ooh, I was like right from the get-go, this is a nice substantial um piece of music there, but there's also like a real sort of nimbleness almost to that sort of I don't know, maybe because the track is called Auditions, I don't know, there's a fair amount of play in there. I feel like I didn't know what to expect, sort of like if you go into an audition room, which I thought was a really sort of unique feeling. Um, you mentioned some of the darkness, like there's another track that it's called Slow Time. I felt like that one, like the dorky notes that I wrote down, so I can read my own handwriting. I don't know, there's something about that orally sounded like your worst fear coming to fruition, or like maybe even like your minds are playing tricks on themselves. I wrote down for some reason a sickness question mark. Um, when the film does sort of address the I would say reality or darkness of maybe some mental state or just circumstances of these men. I guess how did you not want the music to turn too quickly, I guess if that makes sense. Because I feel like we've been talking about it, that there's just like a real emotional support here. Yeah, just want to say maybe addressing darkness of reality. How do you do that?
Um, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like sometimes it's less about the notes and more about the silence or
Mm, okay.
those cues. I would say Miguelito, Slow Time. That those moments after this kind of tragic event in the film where we get um, Divine G. Coleman Domingo's character suddenly that he has a real shift where
Yeah.
he's been kind of a beacon of light the whole time, and then all of a sudden he's not.
Hmm.
And that's pretty powerful, where you really feel the desperation
Yeah.
that must accompany this kind of life of being incarcerated, and the tragedy of that. And so I chose to score it in there's microtonal elements in there where
Okay.
they're nowhere else. So what you're feeling is this like dissonant, but also kind of like claustrophobic. Like the notes have kind of slid into a space where they're not supposed to be.
Hmm.
Not in our kind of Western consonant harmonic mind. The notes are kind of being pushed out of the tonal zone into something atonal,
Yeah.
something tonal, which kind of to me represents like a jail cell. Like no
Yeah.
one's supposed to be living in those conditions. No matter what they did, it's like this,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and I just didn't want to overwhelm the film with that type of behavior. So it's almost kind of like it happens once, really, where there's bits of edges of things. I would say playing with time as well. That the music is not a lot of film music tends to be very repetitive and very metered and very melodic, and these scores are much more kind of like tectonic or something like plate shifting, where
Mhm.
they're shifting in irregular ways. Like sometimes I think to think of just the kind of imagine being in the same place for 1 year, 4 years, 15 years, 33 years, but
Yeah.
just like the repetitiveness of that and the kind of irregularness of that. So like the music itself holds this kind of tone, it holds elements of beauty,
Mm.
but it also kind of plays across the frame, plays across the line, plays across the bars in a way. So it's
Mm.
more orchestral in that way. Almost kind of more painterly, I guess.
Yeah.
Was enjoying that kind of, also in terms of the way it's orchestrated.
Yeah. The I saw Coleman and Clarence speak at a film festival like in October, and there's something about this kind of light that I'm glad that you said that Coleman's character really represents the sort of he's very you have there's a gravitational pull really to that character. And there are a couple of, I think it's more of an overhead shot where we see him in his cell and we see, everything all over the walls. And there's something even about like the shape of that room that just feels really off. And it's sort of like, just even thinking about it, I get a sort of claustrophobic feeling of like nobody should be shoved into that space. And I really I don't know, I think that that's another thing that I love about the music is that when it does take that turn in that cue that I was asking about, it just sort of felt like what felt like I was being like if someone is pushing your back and you're trying with your feet so hard to stop them from moving you. I don't know. Um,
Yeah, it's a little bit like the effect of there's that um that there's not kind of visible violence in the film. There's
right.
where they almost get to that point, but there's a moment where one of the characters, in rehearsal talks about violence and talks about, having watched someone be, throat cut in the prison or something. And it's just really powerful. It's more
Hmm.
powerful than watching it is hearing him say it because it's not everywhere,
Yeah.
restraint in the film, which I felt like the music also had to have, whether it be, obviously the music doesn't kind of enter in the prison tropes, whether it be kind of typical, more contemporary sounds of sort of imagining maybe what music they might have been hearing in there, or um, going the other way, which would be more of like, obviously the score to Shawshank Redemption, Thomas Newman is like one of the classic film scores,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
score doesn't do that. So it's kind of, it exists in its own space and felt like it needed to kind of work towards basically to allow the story to tell itself, to not take up too much space. But it does, for me, it's a fairly ambitious piece of work, like as far as films. I've made many film scores much shorter than this one, I would say. There's
Yeah.
it do some heavy lifting in the end.
Mm. I did want to, I sort of didn't know how to word this question. I almost didn't ask about it. I feel like you kind of prompted me a little bit, like the score living, excuse me, the score kind of living in this particular space. It makes sense in my head to kind of ask that, but it's kind of like this music very much lives within the hearts, minds of these men, but also like physically within the walls of this prison. And I guess I wanted to know if that is something you thought about. Like I kept thinking, because I think I thought of it because I was listening to it, while I was physically in my house for the last 2 days. It was just kind of like, um, did you maybe think that this score and this music is very specifically tied to this like physical location? Does that make sense?
um I mean, because the music is sort of beyond the walls, I
Hmm.
guess. To me, when the perfect place, that moment in the film is to close your eyes and imagine your perfect place. Like
Yeah.
that's where the music lives in a way.
Mm. Okay.
It's like longing for that, or the light coming in from that, or um, I think that there's that famous like Sartre quote, Jean-Paul Sartre, like the famous existential, French poet, something about like like you can't take away like the liberty of the mind. It's like in a way like these men don't have their liberty, but they're searching for the freedom within. So the music maybe doesn't feel tied to this particular place. And I even felt kind of the like ephemeral quality of it, of like you feel in the film itself, you feel its surroundings. There's
Yeah.
this tension between being incarcerated and then the fact that this prison is sitting in this kind of natural place where you see the trees and the railway and the water tower and the sky and the
Mm.
clouds. And like there's that, you know, um, so, and I think it's going to be we're doing a live scoring of this film in a couple weeks in Dublin with a
Okay.
live orchestra. So that'll be really interesting to see if it works.
Oh yeah.
Your point, yeah. And
Yeah,
we'll
no.
be doing the film, but yeah.
Yeah, there's something about I don't know, there's I mean I keep dorkily bringing it up, but it just kept I don't know, there's something that I just felt I don't know. I don't think I've heard a score that it just felt like it felt so alive within like people. Um, and I just have to, I mean, I guess I'll say this before I let you go. It's just that I've been barreling through all of the film scores of the last year, and the short list is a very a wonderful guide as we go through this really, strong year of film, but it just felt like the score to this doesn't feel or sound like anything else. Like when I was listening to it, I found myself realizing that I was stopping what I was doing and I was just listening, and I felt like I was sort of paying a respect almost to the characters in a weird way, just like listening to it. I don't know. It's we didn't really talk about like um like instruments or cellos or anything like that, but I don't know. I think that the music is so unique in how it makes me feel and sort of contemplate the circumstances of this film that I mean, music obviously is very emotionally moving, but this, I don't know, there's a like a realism and it felt very personal to me, even though I'm obviously way outside the circumstances of the characters in this film. And I don't know, I can't really articulate what I'm feeling when I listen to the music, so forgive my lack of
It's, it, that's really nice to hear.
like like vomit that I'm throwing on you, but yeah.
Very nice to hear. I think I was kind of lucky with this, where I was handed this beautiful project
Yeah.
and also humbled before it because of the nature of it. That I was oftentimes you're scoring these things that are these sort of outlandish scenarios that are full of a company playing a part or whatever. But this is
Yeah.
like men playing themselves, telling a very real story, and then doing it in a way that's just incredibly direct and honest. And
Mhm.
so the music had to do the same, I guess,
Yeah.
and to kind of do justice to that. So that's, yeah, I just try to give my most honest sort of version and sort of bring my heart to it,
Yeah.
is which is what I did. And then something about like it feels like the film score of mine that's the least like film music, which is part of what drives it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for your time, Bryce.
Love
Congratulations on being shortlisted. Sorry that I was just like, bleh, 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 bleh.
it's super meaningful. I haven't gotten to talk to people about it, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, good luck to you this season and stay safe. Have a good rest of your day.
Take care, dude.
You
Bye
too.
bye.
Bye-bye.